Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is Castles and Crusades, the combat system. So this is episode 6 of an ongoing series as I go through the player's handbook of Troll Lord Games, Castles and Crusades role-playing game. So, this is the most recent printing. It's a homage cover, one of the homage covers to the original AD&D First Edition Player's Handbook cover. So you can still see the idol up here that the thieves were stripping down, and so really great series of new covers. This is an homage to the original Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition Monster Manual. And here is the Castle Keeper's Guide, and obviously an homage to the Afridi on the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons DMG. So all of these have been coming out since I believe 2021. Monsters and Treasures might have been a little bit earlier, printing 2019. So 19 through 21. So these are the most up-to-date printings. Troll Lord Games is coming out with a manual of the plane, so really looking forward to that. And they don't do editions, they do printing. So without further ado, let's start taking a look at the combat system. So really anxious to get into this one. I was excited, I should say, to get into this one because I found that the actual combat system of Castles and Crusades is the real big standout to me. Is that you don't have the 2-hit charts to use. And, for me, primarily running AD&D First Edition, I certainly can see how this is going to streamline my running of games because I don't have to look up charts and see, well, you're a 6th level fighter trying to hit an AC of 4. What do you actually need to what do you need to roll in order to do it? Here it's a much more simplified system, and I'm going to start going over that now. So, as always, I'm using the PDF to actually slowly walk you through it, so we do it in real time. And I'm using the PDF for the 7th printing of the Player's Handbook. This, as I said, is the 8th printing, so this is the most up-to-date printing of it. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. And I will make this larger so you can see. So we're just going to focus on the combat system at this point. So combat, much of the excitement in playing Castles and Crusades occurs during the character's combat with monsters. Whether a knight battling a horde of bloodthirsty orcs, a rogue facing off with a nefarious pirate, or a cleric turning a vampire, combat is often the climax of many role-playing sessions. Combat is also the nexus of many rules in Castles and Crusades. Managing combat is often a challenging affair, as the castle keeper must not only know the rules, but must also know how to apply the rules fluidly to maintain a sense of excitement through description and action. To facilitate this, the rules for combat have been kept as simple as possible, with much maneuvering room left for the castle keeper for the castle keeper, period. The rules are designed to organize the action of combat, yet as the essence of combat is its narrative, they also enable the castle keeper to manipulate the rules in support of narrative. Narrative development is an equally important to the game as the combat results. The rules of combat and its narrative development is discussed below. Okay, so let's start getting right into it. The basic outline, so they're going to go into, basically the sequence of action. Each participant acts during the round in order established by rolling a d10. So d10 is the initiative roll. If a player character attacks during a combat round, the player characters or the character's player rolls a d20 to determine if the character hits the opponent. If the result number plus the character's class bonuses to hit plus any attribute modifiers is equal to or greater than the opponent's armor class, the character has successfully hit the opponent. So it is very, very simple system, right? You basically take all of your modifiers and you make a roll with a d20. You match that roll up against the armor class that you're attempting to hit. If you met the armor class or exceeded the armor class, you have hit. If you fall below that number, you have missed. Very, very simple. So no combat charts needed to see. Doesn't matter what your level is. Your level is going to get built into the modifiers. All right, so a first level character gets a +1. A 10th level character gets a +10. So the chances of a 10th level character hitting are extremely likely versus a first level character. Sample of combat round. Angthar, a 5th level barbarian with a 14 strength, attacks a goblin with his battle axe. The player rolls a d20 and the result is a 12. Angthar adds his basic attack bonus of +4 and his strength bonus of +1 to get a total attack roll of 17. The goblin's scaly hide imparts an armor class of 12. Angthar's attack roll of 17 exceeds the goblin's armor class. Thus, Angthar has successfully hit the goblin with the battle axe. The battle axe inflicts d8 damage, hit points of damage. So Angthar's player rolls a d8 and adds Angthar's strength bonus of a +1 to the roll. In this example, Angthar rolled a 6 for a total of 7 points. The goblin only had 4 hit points, so Angthar has defeated it in one swing of his mighty axe. Very, very simple, straightforward. Again, the beauty of this, no charts to look up at. All you need to know is what is your opponent's armor class and what are your modifiers to the roll. That's simple. It is very, very common to hit roll and your damage all in one roll. That way, if you've hit, you automatically have your damage inflicted as well. If you've missed, it doesn't really matter. You just ignore both rolls, basically. If Angthar had only inflicted 2 points of damage, the goblin would have survived the attack. It then gets to perform an action, perhaps an attack on Angthar with its wicked curved scimitar. All right, so yes, if you do not kill your opponent, your opponent will then have an opportunity to attack you back. That's if you won initiative. All right, so attacker, the term. So these are basic terms, right? So you have your attacker. You have your basic to hit bonus. You have your combat round, combat maneuver, which I'll get into a little bit more detail. You have damage. You have a defender. You have hit dice. Hit dice is the equivalent of using the term level. And you have hit points, initiative, surprise. This is the act of one party. I'm going to read surprise. So this is the act of one party or individual catching another party or individual unaware. The party gaining surprise gets 1 free combat round to act against the surprise party, who may do nothing. So the combat round, so the first thing that you determine is, well, first of all, combat rounds are 10 seconds long. During this round, all the characters, monsters, and non-player characters should get a chance to act. Generally, only one action is allowed, such as making a melee attack or casting a spell. The types of actions are discussed ahead. Surprise, I kind of already mentioned it. So before combat begins, the castle keeper determines if one or the other party is surprised. Surprise is a situation in which the adventuring party happens upon monsters and neither is aware nor expects the other. Surprise establishes who becomes aware first. The group that successfully surprises the other gains a free combat round in which to act. Those that are surprised get no action. After the surprise round, combat proceeds normally. So the first thing that the castle keeper does is determine if surprise is even possible. So every time that you have two parties coming together, the first thing that the castle keeper does is decide, what is this a situation where a surprise could have occurred? You know, in many cases, the encounter is not going to involve surprise. You know, if you have your if the adventure party has gone into a lair, they're expecting to encounter something at every turn, right? And if by some way inhabitants of that lair had raised the alarm, then they too will be on the alert. And so, you know, surprise, I think in this system, the way it's described, is going to become something that is less and less likely to happen. And I think oftentimes some of us just fall into the bad habit of just assuming, every time you're going to roll for surprise and see, who has surprise, without really considering, is there any kind of an opportunity for this? So it's something I oftentimes just, forget to consider. And so it's nice to see a reminder of that here. All right, so they go into, and surprise is checked on a wisdom check. All right, so you're going to use the wisdom. Now you can do individual surprise, but I wouldn't recommend that. That's a whole lot of dice rolling to see. In many cases, or virtually in all cases, you're going to do a group surprise. And that's for both the NPCs and monsters and the player character group. But you could certainly individualize it if you wish as well. Once the surprise round has been resolved, then you go into regular initiative. The order of attack and combat round is determined by an initiative roll. Every creature or character participating in combat round rolls a d10 to determine their initiative each round. Those with the highest roll take their action first, and the actions of the others descend from there. In the case of a tie, the one with the highest dexterity goes first. In the case of equal dexterity, simultaneous action occurs. And again, you can do party initiative as well. There is one exception to initiative, and this is a really important point to make. When a creature uses a weapon with a reach of greater than 10 feet against an opponent with a weapon with less than a 6-foot reach, or when a large creature is fighting a medium or small creature. In the first round only, the creature with the longer reach or larger size is allowed to attack first, even if the creature with the shorter reach or smaller size won the initiative roll. The roll only applies to the creature with the shorter reach or smaller creatures approaching within 10 feet. Such action counts as an action for the round for the larger creature or the one with the longer weapon. All right, so basically the reach of the weapon counteracts initiative. So combat actions. In a combat round, characters can perform a wide variety of actions. Every possible action, however, can be categorized in one of 5 types of actions that may be performed during combat. You have an attack, very self-explanatory. You have casting a spell. You have movement. You have use an ability, or use an item. So these are the 5 general actions that you can take, 1 per round in most circumstances, but there are things such as haste spells that you can also incorporate. Non-lethal and multiple actions, so we'll get into this now. This is, of course, another broad category encompassing non-lethal or otherwise mundane actions such as talking, standing still, and doing nothing or to pick up an item. Such actions typically have no chance of failure, however, so they are not considered combat actions. So you can, in the same round, draw your sword and attack the same round. The action of drawing your sword or readying your weapon does not count towards, an action round. If by some means you had your sword knocked out of your hand, let's say, and you've lost that particular combat round, in the next round, you would be able to pick up your sword and still attack. Picking up the item would not count as a loss of your action. Movement in the combat round. Once initiative or surprise is determined, each character or monster involved in combat is allowed an action. One allowed action is movement. Movement, like the combat round, is an abstraction. It is a manner of establishing a distance that can be moved in a given period of time. Movement can be in a straight line or curved around the corner. Base movement rates are listed in each racial or monster description. The listed rate is the distance in feet that can be moved in one combat round. If encumbered, movement is reduced. As described in the encumbrance section, movement can be increased by jogging, double the movement rate, or running, quadruple the movement rate. Drop all fractions. Okay. An attacker can move 1/2 their movement rate and still attack. All right, so this is very important to remember. So if you're doing your full movement, that will use the entire combat round. You won't be able to do any other action. However, you can move at half your rate and still attack. Very important for melee combatants, but it's also important for those that are looking to get a looking to separate and still do, like, whether it be missile fire or casting a spell or whatever. So very important factor to keep in mind, that a player character, or a monster for that matter, can move half its movement rate and then still attack as well. Melee combat occurs when two creatures engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The attack rolls d20, the attacker, rolls d20 and adds his or her basic to hit bonuses plus any strength modifier. The monster's basic to hit bonus is equal to its number of hit dice. So if you have a creature that has 3 hit dice, it is going to add +3 to all of its combat rolls. It is important to note that the melee attack, like the combat round and movement, is also an abstraction. All right, and one thing I think is really important for you to remember is that the combat round is 10 seconds long. You are not just moving, let's say, 15 feet and swinging your sword in that 10 seconds. You're doing a variety of other things as well during that course. There's much more narrative, there's much more description of the actual action that's taking place. Yes, we're only calculating the results of a single attack, and we're keeping in mind the movement of half the movement rate. But there are other things that are taking place. Your character is still seeing and hearing and smelling and, sensing things as he or she is moving forward as well. Even once they get into combat, just the fact that, you're getting one attack, but that attack might be just one part of the action taking place. If I'm swinging my sword and I have a second free hand, maybe that free hand I'm kind of putting my hand up and blocking the attack as I'm swinging my sword. Maybe I'm grabbing a hold of my opponent and trying to thrust my dagger, into the opponent with a little bit more force and everything. There's, maybe there's a struggle, there's a scrum, and then we the one opponent pushes the other away a little bit, creating a little distance and still getting the attack. Like there's a lot of action taking place in that 10 seconds. It's not just I've walked 15 feet, I've swung my sword. That's everything that I've done in that 10 seconds of time. A lot more going on. Ranged combat is much like melee combat, except it occurs when an attack is made with a missile weapon against a defender some distance away. Dexterity is the attribute that modifies ranged attacks to hit rolls. If the total of a d20 plus the character's basic to hit bonuses and dexterity modifier is greater than or equal to the armor class, the attack has successfully hit the defender, and you inflict damage normally. There are 2 types of ranged weapons, thrown and propelled. Thrown weapons are those whose momentum are dependent upon the strength of the character or monster throwing it. These include javelins, daggers, spears, and the like. Propelled weapons are those whose momentum and thrust are dependent on the mechanism which propels them forward. This includes crossbows, stones from a sling, and similar devices. While a character's dexterity modifier is added to all ranged hit rolls, a character's strength modifier is only added to damage of thrown weapons, not propelled weapons. Ranged weapons also have range increments, and they have a maximum effect distance equal to 3 times the listed range increment as detailed in the equipment list. The listed range increment is considered to be close range, twice the range increment is medium range, and 3 times the increment is long range. Medium range results in a -2 penalty to the ranged attack roll, and long range results in a -6 penalty to the attack roll. So once again, very, very simple system used here. If you are short range, you're going to get, or the general range, the basic range, you have no modifier to your hit roll. If you are at medium range, you're at a -2. If you're at long range, you're at -6. Ranged weapons that miss their target continue on their path and can potentially hit another target within close range. If the target of the attack is missed, the projectile continues in a straight line and can't hit anything in its path. For each 10 feet traveled within close range, the archer should roll to hit roll again, but the attacker accrues a -1 penalty for every 10 feet beyond the original target. The exception to this rule is that bolts fired from a crossbow continue up to long range, although the medium and long range modifiers still apply. All right, so so let's say you have a target that is within your close range, and let's say it's 20 feet away, and your close range is out to 40 feet. Well, you missed your first target. If there are two other targets, one 10 feet further and then a final one 20 feet further, you will make your first attack with no modifier. You missed. Your second attack would be at a -1, and your third attack would be at a -3. All right, and so you could potentially hit any other target that is in that line of fire. I like it. I like this system better than checking to see if if you miss, it's only on a fumble that you could hit another target. Here, it just makes it more likely if you miss your target that you're going to hit another target if it's possible, if it's in that line of fire, basically. Unarmed combat is similar to armed combat, only the attacker is not using a melee weapon, but natural weapons such as claws, hands, fangs, or even the whole body. Many monsters employ unarmed melee attacks, as do monk characters. In most cases, a successful attack are determined as in the normal means. All right, so very much the same system. Grappling involves grabbing and holding a defender, as with the classical wrestling, or a snake constricting its body around its prey. Grappling is directed at holding an opponent and subduing them. The attacker rolls a d20 and adds any strength modifier to his bonus to hit. The armor class of the defender is in an overbearing attack is different than normal. A defender without strength as a prime has a standard AC of 12. The defender with the strength as a prime has an AC of 18. All right, so a stronger, let me put it this way. So a character with a prime requisite or prime attribute of strength, it is going to be, you're going to have a base target of 18 in order to grapple that character, as opposed to a 12. So if you are trying to grapple a fighter, you're going to need, that fighter is going to be treated as having an AC of 18. If you're trying to grapple a magic user, then it's only a 12. Unless, of course, the magic user has an attribute primary as, as strength, which is going to be uncommon, but not impossible. Ooh, I hate when it does that. Sometimes the mouse runs away on me, and it's going to do it again. I just have to shift a little bit. I'm sorry. Let's get... let's see, grappling. All right. And I explain this. So you have pummeling. Pummeling, like boxers or martial artists, pummel involved, uses fists works exactly the same thing as anything else. You're going to get your to hit bonuses and your damage bonuses based on strength modifier and so on. So overbearing, this type of attack is used to knock an opponent down. This is a tactic used in wrestling and other types of hand-to-hand combat, as well as when an animal charges and knocks someone over. The attacker rolls a d20 to hit, adds a strength modifier or other modifier that the castle keeper deems fit. The castle keeper may or may not deem the basic to hit bonus on appropriate modifier. The armor class for overbearing attacks is determined the same fashion as grappling, using the defender's strength, the basic to hit of hit dice, and size differential as modifiers. All right, so a small character trying to knock down a much larger creature is going to have a hard time overbearing that creature. You're going to have additional minuses to your attempt. Touch attacks is one in which the attacker simply is trying to touch the opponent. This often occurs with spells requiring a touch to be successful. With a touch attack, a standard armor class of 10 is used for all defenders, adjusting only by dexterity of the defender and special modifying results from, for example, magic items or spells. Monsters use a base of 10 AC with no modifiers. All right, so if you're trying to just touch something, an opponent, you in most cases only need a 10 on your roll, plus your modifiers to make contact. So someone wearing chainmail armor is no more difficult to touch as someone wearing just regular clothing. Situational modifiers, and we will start taking a look at this little chart here. If the defender is prone or blind, +5 to the modifier. So it's easier to hit someone that's on the ground or blind. Defender's prone and defenseless, you're having a +10. Defender at a lower elevation, you have a +1. Defender stunned or cowering, a +2. Defender is invisible or attacker is blinded, -10. Melee attack from a mount or unstable platform is a -2. Ranged attack from a mount or unstable platform, -4. Defender is 1/4 concealed in a light fog, -2. Defender is half concealed dense fog, -4. Defender is concealed near darkness, -6. Defender is completely concealed, -10. Other factors, armor class, which I've explained earlier on shields. Every shield has a +1 modifier to armor class, plus the size of the shield determines how many opponents the +1 modifier applies against. Small shields, only one attacker, medium up to 2, and large up to 3. Helmets only grant armor class bonus against attacks going for the head, obviously. Dexterity increases armor class, so a positive dexterity makes your armor class higher. This system does use ascending armor class. Very important to remember. Various levels of cover give bonuses to armor class. Magic applies many different modifiers to armor class as well. Combat maneuvers. So let's see. We'll go a little bit more into detail with combat maneuvers. The first maneuver is dodging. In this case, a character can dodge up to 3 attacks in a round that originated from the attackers, which they are facing and are unaware of. If dodging, the character sacrifices their action in that round. All right, so If you're in total defense mode and you are just trying to just not get hit yourself, you're not going to make any other action but avoiding getting attacked or getting hit, then you will you can do that up to 3 attacks being directed against you. The character gains a +2 to their armor class while dodging. A character can dodge every round should they desire. Disengaging from combat. Disengaging from combat is a dangerous maneuver since it exposes the character to attacks, but it automatically puts distance between the disengaging party and their opponent. Hasty disengagement is one which the character or monsters attempt to leave combat and expends all effort to do so. A character disengaging hastily may move as far as possible up to their maximum running distance, but they suffer a -2 to armor class, and their opponent gets an attack against them as they run away. This is a free attack and does not count against the opponent's other action in the round. Although the opponent may not make a second attack against the fleeing character, the armor class adjustments last throughout the combat round and applies to every attack against the fleeing character. Fighting disengagement is a more carefully executed withdrawal from combat. By performing a fight disengagement, the character moves 1/2 their movement rate or less away from the opponents, and they can disengage from combat. The character suffers no penalty to armor class, but they also cannot take any action in their round. In the round following the disengagement, the character or monster has put distance between themselves and the opponent. Disarming. A fighter, ranger, knight, rogue, assassin, cleric, and paladin can disarm an opponent. Let's see what they left out there. Just magic user or wizard. The character must successfully hit an armor class equivalent of 18 plus the hit dice or level of the defender to successfully disarm. For example, a ranger would need to hit an armor class of 23 to disarm a 5 hit dice creature or level 5 opponent. The defender receives a dexterity bonus to their armor class if applicable. Evading this maneuver is a desperate attempt to avoid being hit and involves using all one's energy to dodge and parry blows but remain engaged in combat. All right. Evading confers a +4 to armor class for the round. Flanking attacks. Flanking attack is an attack from the side. A flanking attack confers a +1 to hit. Rear attacks at +2. 2-weapon fighting. The character is allowed to swing with both weapons, thus gaining 2 attacks in a single round, but the attack with the primary hand is at a -3, and the attack with the secondary hand is -6. A monk may use 2 weapons fighting rule to gain a second hand-to-hand attack before the character reaches 6th level. If the monk does so, both attacks suffer the penalties for 2-weapon fighting. When a monk reaches 6th level, the character gains a secondary hand-to-hand attack, and the monk's secondary hand-to-hand attack ability does not suffer any penalties for 2-weapon fighting. Narrative of combat. A clear understanding of the rules is essential to run a smooth combat. A competent grasp of initiative, movement, and allowed actions allows the castle keeper to react to circumstances, answer questions, and resolve issues that arise during the course of any combat. But a technical understanding of combat does not necessarily create a successful combat. Combat is an essential part of Castles and Crusades experience. It is often the combat degenerates into rules manipulation, dice rolling, and forays into a number of crunching that more resembles an economic course than a heroic encounter. Combat should be the heroic struggle between good and evil, law and chaos. Combat pits the paladin against the lich, locks the knight in deadly struggle with a dragon, and aligns the wizard in magical opposition to abyssal creatures threatening his world. Castles and Crusades often revolves around such struggles. It's the Castle Keeper's duty to make certain that the combat resolution is balanced and challenging, but most of all, fun. The Castle Keeper must engage the players that make them forget the rules and draw them into the whirling maelstrom of the bone-crunching maw of the dragon. This is combat through narrative. So, yeah, it's one thing, and I know it's very, very difficult to do. And again, even I, as an experienced game master, when I am in a very complex combat situation, I have a lot of players in my AD&D campaign, and if they're encountering a large number of creatures that they are fighting, oftentimes you get bogged down in calling off the rolls. Instead of saying, I rolled a 16, you're just going to say, because you will know what your target number is, generally speaking, I have hit. And then you describe your hit with with your just narratively talking about your damage roll. So let's say I hit my opponent, I rolled a maximum damage. I wouldn't say, all right, I rolled a 15, I hit the orc for 8 points of damage. Instead, I would just say, I made an attack on the orc, and I hit the orc with a mighty blow of my sword. All right, and then the DM is going to see, or I should say the Castle Keeper is going to see the amount of damage, whether it be on the die roll on the table or on your virtual tabletop, and then the Castle Keeper will then describe the effect of that hit on the opponent. Again, not numerically, not saying, all right, you dealt 8 points of damage, but yeah, your mighty sword stroke hits the orc across the torso, splitting him wide open on the side, and he falls to the ground, bleeding out and dying at your feet. Much better way of saying it that way than just talking about the points that were done. Okay, let's see. So hit points. Hit points represent the amount of damage, physical and mental, a character, non-player character, or monster can take before passing out or dying. All right, hit points are determined by a character or monster hit die. There are several hit die types: a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, and a D12. Class descriptions list the hit die type. All right, so they go into here. So the amount of damage being taken at -1 to -6, well, let's see, at 0. Let's see what happens at 0, what they say at 0. All right. In general, when 0 hit points is reached, the character or monster passes out. They are not dead, but rather incapable of acting. At -1 to -6, the character or monster is unconscious and grievously wounded. They require bed rest to recover. Unless magically healed, a character so wounded must rest 24 hours before the process of healing begins. With most magical healing, the character hit points can only be returned to 0, after which the normal healing process begins. For example, a knight is struck by a club from an Eton and reduced to -1 hit points. Before healing begins, the knight must wait 24 hours. However, a cleric of goodly intent decides to share the grace of the deity with the knight and casts a Cure Light Wound spell. The cure is for 8 points, but the knight is only brought back to 0. However, healing can proceed as normal thereafter. He still has to wait the 24 hours before he will gain another hit point naturally. At -7 to -9, the character or monster is mortally wounded and loses 1 hit point per round. After reaching -7 hit points, aid administered to wounds stops the hit point loss. This takes at least 1 full round, during which no hit point is lost. After 24 hours have passed, the normal healing process as described for -1 to -6 begins. So damage takes its toll in a variety of ways. Weapon damage, magic damage, subdual damage, falling damage, falling damage. If a character were to fall from a height of 45 feet, they would take D6 for the first 10 feet, 2d6 for the second 10 feet, 3d6 for the third 10 feet, and 4d6 damage for the last 10 feet, for a total of 10d6 damage points of damage. So yeah, much more falling damage than I recall in Dungeons and Dragons. D&D was a d6 for each of the 10 feet, so a 40-foot drop would only be 4d6, as opposed to how they're kind of compounding the falling damage here. So much more damaging. Turning undead is a wisdom check. A cleric can attempt to turn one type of undead per round. For example, a group of 6 skeletons, 4 zombies, and a vampire approach a cleric, who decides to attempt turning. The cleric can attempt to turn one type. The first round, the cleric elects to attempt to turn the zombies. The cleric makes a turn undead check and succeeds. On the next round, the cleric attempts to turn the skeletons or the vampire. I don't know why you wouldn't turn the vampire first, and just bear the brunt of the damage from the skeletons. I would probably do vampire, zombie, skeleton, but hey, those are choices. Number of undead turned. The number of undead monsters are turned is determined by special rules that depends on the undead monster's type, common, extraordinary, or unique. Common undead are non-sentient, automaton-like undead creatures such as skeletons and zombies. Extraordinary are semi-sentient undead of greater power that usually have special abilities. They typically are trapped between the material and spirit worlds. The turn undead ability affects D12 common, D6 extraordinary, or 1 unique undead. So very much simplifies that rule there as well. Turned undead flee at the full movement rate for 10 rounds. If unable to flee, they will cower. A +2 bonus to hit awarded on all attacks versus cowering undead. You also get the bonuses for fleeing as well. So, against fleeing, destroying undead. If a cleric or paladin is 5 levels higher than the hit dice of the type of undead being turned, the character destroys the undead instead of turning them. Again, Very much simplified rules. Evil clerics can control undead rather than turning. It's their choice. Paladins turn undead as a cleric of 2 levels lower than the paladin's level. We get into experience points. Monster adds the value of all monsters defeated or overcome on the adventure. Each monster has an XP value, and a bonus can be given if specified monster was greater than normal for its type. The total XP is then divided by the number of characters that defeated the monster. Money, you are awarded 1 XP to the party for every 1 gold piece value of non-magical treasure such as money, gems, art. Magic items like monsters. Magic items have an XP value. You should award magic XP to the character who possesses and uses the item for a period of time. The castle keeper should assign XP value to adventure and awarded to the character who completed the adventure successfully. Role-playing, there's always a bonus range that you can get for role-playing. And gaining levels. Let's see if this is going to be a whole different section. Yes, we're going to deal with this in a whole different video. So we pretty much have everything covered in combat there. So I know this kind of went kind of long. I wanted to describe it. If you boil all of this down, because I know I did a lot of talking there and going over the various systems and calculations that you do. But as you become accustomed to it and you really boil everything down, a lot of this calculating is just going to become very, very quickly. And as I suggested earlier on, if you're rolling your attack die, your d20 along with your damage simultaneously, you're going to eliminate some of that additional dice rolling. A little bit more complex if you missed with a ranged attack, and then you have to calculate and determine. But in most cases, the the castle keeper, in most cases, the castle keeper is going to make the determination first what rolls are necessary and which rolls aren't needed. All right, and so and that comes into play with like the surprise. That might also come into play with a missed melee. A missed ranged attack, where the castle keeper might just say, well, no one else was really in that vicinity that errant arrow would probably hit. So you wouldn't even have to calculate that. And as always, try to stay away from just reciting the numbers that were rolled. Instead, just talk about the results of the roll in a narrative way rather than a numerical way. And just remember the situation, of the combat taking place. There were a lot of references to cover, combat maneuvers and everything. So all of these things come into play. During your game session, you will probably have, a few combats that take place. All right. And so having a more detailed combat round is not as overwhelming the whole period of your game session. All right. If you're planning on having 15 or 20 combats during a game session, all right, that's a lot. All right. And you're going to spend a lot of time crunching these things down. I think that it's probably a much better experience if you kind of limit the number of combats taking place during that game session. And that way, if your combat is going to last a little bit longer and be a much more time-consuming and detailed event, it makes it stand out better that you have this multi-layer of combat taking place. The resolution is simple, but your choices in what actions you're taking is a little bit more broad or a little bit more varied. And so, so just keep that in mind. Bear that in mind as as a castle keeper. Bear that in mind as a group of players as well. That you're going to come up with like a routine of what you tend to do, and so that will speed up combat as well. If you're especially if you coordinate your attacks with the rest of the party members, you come down with like you come down with almost like plays. Like a professional sports team will have a variety of different plays that they run under general circumstances, and so you could do the same thing, so that you kind of get into a routine of reducing the number of rolls, but still keeping the complexity of the combat going forward. So that's just a tip, or something you might want to try out. So once again, thanks for joining. I know it's been a couple days since I've put up a video, so thanks for those of you that have still been picking up some of my older videos and watching some of the older videos. I'm getting a lot of people reaching back in time and commenting on videos that I've done over the last 2 years. So that's really exciting to see that some of the older content is still being brought forward. People still commenting on those. Really looking forward to going over Luftwaffe, which was a request that was put out to me. I certainly should be able to get to it during this weekend. I've sort of cleared off my table over here to lay out just the game board and everything, and I'll do a quick walkthrough of a scenario or two, just to show that game system. And the next time that I return to Castles and Crusades, I'm just going to start going through the monsters and treasures, and talking a little bit about it, talking about the way that it's laid out, from both the stat blocks and then the other information that's in here, including the treasure tables and such. And then finally, a wrap up on my Castles and Crusades first looks at the core books. In the core, I will get to the Castle Keeper's Guide and just talk a little bit about that as well. Probably won't do a much more than a few videos breaking down the Castle Keeper's Guide and the various elements or sections of the table of contents with you. So once again, thanks for joining. Have a great weekend. It's a Labor Day weekend for most people, so most people have the 3-day weekend off. It's oftentimes the last barbecue weekend, so enjoy your weekend. Stay safe out there, and as always, keep on gaming, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You all have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.